The second act of Wicked has been released, and while reception is largely leaning positive, it is a bit more complicated and divisive than the first one, as it was always going to be. Where the first smash hit movie was an adaptation of only the first act, it is the common opinion of fans of the musical to prefer the first act to the second act. And that includes me. I definitely had a period in my life where I wore the Wicked soundtrack out to the point where I admit no matter how good the voices in the movie are, they're always going to sound a little wrong in my brain because they're not the original soundtrack. But I absolutely loved the first movie, if only because here was a musical movie that wasn't ashamed that it was a musical, between Tom Hooper's obsession with realism and set singing, "My eyes are on fire!" and Hollywood constantly feeling the need to hide that movies are musicals in their advertising. Then here comes Wicked with all of its unapologetic S-tier camp and bombast, and more so being able to justify the medium of film by injecting an astounding level of production value. Oh my god, the sets are so pretty! And what it expanded on the original material did a wonderful job of giving moments and character more charm and dimension, but largely due to the fact that Act 1 has most of the best and most cohesive material of the musical. But it'd be one thing if the second act merely just didn't have the best songs. It is also very different in tone and scale. The first movie is mostly very fun and lighthearted, taking place at the school or in Oz with all of these characters, which means that there's both a lot of characters to interact with and lots of characters to perform in these big elaborate dance numbers. And even in just the first half, both girls have already gone through some fairly substantive and clear emotional arcs, going from enemies to friends, and Elphaba going from idolizing the wizard to being betrayed by him. In contrast, the second act is much darker and more focused on purely our lead characters. There are hardly any crowds for any big dance numbers, and what songs there are mostly quieter and slower solos or duets, which admittedly is hard to get across using just the trailer footage. It's funny how these trailers remind me of Ghibli trailers, where it's like, put in every single instance of rapid movement to get across that this movie is a lot more exciting when the majority of it is characters being very stationary and talking quietly. Which, yeah, if you thought the first movie had too many long, silent pauses, there are not less of them. The girl's journey forwards is more complex and melancholy, but also hampered by a story that is kind of eclectic and weirdly paced. Because this is also the part of the story where we connect the revisionist Wicked narrative and try to get it to fit in with the original Wizard of Oz story, which in the play, it is largely done as though it takes place behind or in between the scenes of the movie, which gives the impression that we are just missing giant gaps in the story. And where the first movie can get all of the praise and admiration for introducing its relevant political themes, the second act is practically doomed to carrying the impossible burden and expectations to resolve and provide an answer for political conflicts that we haven't even solved in real life. From high expectations of the first movie to less great songs, less musical variety, less choreography, less cohesive story, and then you also need to make it twice as long, because it needs to be feature-length and not feel completely lengthily imbalanced from the first one. Yeah, the second act kind of has literally everything working against it. And then add that this production is dedicated for this to largely stay a loyal adaptation to the musical. It has to keep all of the major story elements, even the ones that everyone agrees are not that great. It can add things, but it can't significantly change or remove. Like, the only real changes I can currently think of is noteful, if not necessarily impactful change, is now Elphaba puts magic on her sister's iconic shoes not to walk, but to fly. And this means a lot because there has always been a bit of criticism over this narrative for Nessa, feeding into the disabled villain trope, that all they want is to be fixed. And it also meant that Nessa's character could have never been played on stage by an actual paraplegic. But this movie's Nessa is, and they really did put a lot of thought and consideration and consulting into how to handle her character from her perspective. But likely the biggest significant actual change is that now Glinda is present for Elfie's second meeting with the wizard. So there's this genuinely joyous temporary reconciliation that really helps to keep the friendship story afloat. So a lot of weight is put on the effects, the setting, and the additions. The effects give a couple of fun cinematic action scenes, which changed the way we're going to look at the yellow brick road forever. And like the first movie, it is significant that the animals actually look like animals. As for what they added, several scenes have expanded dialogue, which is all to the net benefit of the respective characters, but the big ones are the 2 added songs for each of the main characters. Girl in the Bubble accentuates Glinda coming to grips with how she's become a propaganda tool for the system scapegoating her friend, which is nice, but it's pretty much just saying the subtext out loud from Couldn't Be Happier, so it's kind of redundant. And Elphaba's on-the-nose No Place Like Home certainly does sound like an anthem for a hypothetical people to fight for their hypothetical homeland being destroyed by a hypothetical lying narcissist, while bringing an extra dose of hope and sorrow into her tragic story that good ideals doesn't guarantee ideal outcomes. The real credit for that is to bring the story temporarily back to the actual animal plight. The entire reason Elphaba got villainized in the first place, which is good because the play almost completely dropped that part. While these songs did do decently to add to their characters, their addition did have a certain consequence. That in a movie that already was pretty heavy on ballads, gave us 2 more ballads. And where that is particularly unfortunate, the one major thing that I love about the second act is the movie's title namer, the song For Good. The song of every talent show audition and graduation party of the mid-2000s. But this song may be more personal to me than even the more popular of Wicked's songs. It is one of those songs where just the first line already causes me to start crying, along with Remember Me and I'm Dreaming of Home. But now, in the movie, because of the added songs, it had this slight disappointing sensation when it came on of, oh look, another emotional ballads where the actresses stay perfectly still on screen. We don't even take full advantage of exploring the castle set during. What happened to the fun exploration of the Wizard and I? However, what I have heard is that John Chu actually was going to make the cinematography in this scene a little bit more ambitious because it's the last song and it needs to be at least a little bit spectacular, but then it rained. So I think they kind of had to do it this way. And if I am just talking about the song and the scene itself, it makes perfect sense to focus just on the 2 girls and their intimacy. It's just unfortunate that it comes at the end of a 2-hour movie with a bunch of other ballads that are staged somewhat similarly. However, the very end of the film absolutely nails the most important job, with its cinematic elevation delivering the harrowing emotional conclusion around the girls' friendship. It's heartbreaking, it's beautiful to really see it up close, and that truly is, more than anything, the reason to see this movie. So basically, whether or not you're going to enjoy this film is kind of dependent on a bunch of factors on what you want out of this movie. If you are a musical fan and all you wanted to see is the second act with better effects and mildly expanded, it did certainly do that. If you're a musical fan and you wanted major improvements that made you suddenly love the second act, not really, because it is pretty much the same story. If you're a moviegoer and you want the same experience as the first one, complete with a showstopper that rivals Defying Gravity, absolutely not. However, if you liked the movie purely for its character and actually don't like the big chorus songs or dance numbers, maybe this will be an improvement. But I will tell you certainly the biggest factor that will tell you about whether or not you'll love this movie, and that is how into the love triangle you are. If that is the number one thing that got you hot in the first one, this is the finale for you. And I really can see theater people might actually being the tougher sell to the changes or even the lack of them. But to those who have never seen this part before, who I think essentially should still be warned about the dip in exuberance, may have a more favorable experience when their first exposure to this story has superior execution. But overall, how did I feel about it? Honestly, I am glad this movie exists purely as a completionist. Like, we did this much for the first movie, so we can do at least this for the second. I do find it to be an improvement on the play. I'm glad the ending hits the way it does, but I personally do really like the upbeat songs and the dance numbers, so 2 hours of ballads was kind of a lot. And in the end, it didn't do much to drastically change my opinion on this part of the story. If anything would have done that, it would have been doing more with the Wizard of Oz movie tie-ins, which remained as about as vague, but still intrusive as they were in the original play. But I also know they really couldn't do anything more because there's still copyright on the original film. The book is open, which is why the shoes are silver. except when they glow, nice loophole, but they couldn't reference the original film too directly. I like the complexity of the girls' journeys and of course their friendship, but I really don't care about that love triangle. Basically, on par with many people's opinions, I felt it was fine, even good, just not great like the first movie. But on a personal level, because of the production value, the fantastic songs, and the cleaner emotional arcs of the first movie, I think that the larger-than-life tragic ambiguity of defying gravity is almost worth it to end it there. In fact, it may have actually been the plan, which is why the first movie is literally just called Wicked, while the second movie gets the extra tagline. But this is very much my own preference.